And a big g'day to everybody up there in the Meredith district. It's Graham Anderson here from Ag Victoria, just with a bit of an update on all things climate, seasonal variability. So what we've got here is a long-term rainfall record for Meredith. It's from Dara and goes back to 1875, so a fantastic long-term record. So you can see here, this is the 1875 right through up to last year. We've got the long-term average is this line through here, which is 670 millimeters, but you can see some years it can be up to almost 1,000 or over, and then some years it can barely crack 400 mils. So you can see some of those droughts. That's a 67 and 82 and 2006. So a lot of variability there, and we'll talk about why some years are so wet and others drier. But also you can see over the last 20 years we've had 17 drier than average and only 3 above average. So we'll also talk about, is that normal or what? So here's just looking at that same rainfall record from Meredith, but it's looking at the seasons. So that's summer rainfall pattern. You can see a lot of variability in there. Really, no signal there recently for summer rainfall in one direction or the other. Autumn rainfall, and I guess this is probably the one season which is quite different, is that the autumn break of old or what have you. Certainly, the last 15-20 years, autumn's been the one season that's been less reliable and a bit drier. We'll talk about why. Winter, they're still variable. Spring's pretty variable. Probably the last 10 years, we've had a couple extra that have been a bit drier. But plenty of variability in there, and we'll talk about why. Okay, the key influences of those wetter and dry years. We need two things to make rainfall down in this part of the world, in southern Australia. We need a good source of moisture, and those wetter years are when there's lots of extra moisture blowing in from the tropics, either out here from the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean. And then it's a matter of when that runs into these cold fronts, which was across southern Australia. When the moisture hits the cold air, it falls out as rain, and some years we've got a lot of extra moisture coming our way, and some years it's a bit drier. So out here, when there's an El Nino on, that's a dry year. There's less moisture coming towards us, and the same here out in the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean dipole, it varies from year to year as to whether it's sending more moisture or not. Here's an example, the drought of 2006 September. This is sea surface temperature pattern, and this is an anomaly map. So this is where along the equator the water will be really warm and the water will be really cold, but this is an anomaly. So what these colours here are just showing where the water at that time was either 2 degrees warmer than average or where it was cooler. And you can see out in the Pacific there was warmer water out here where there's an El Nino underway, and cooler water up here. Now what that means in those sort of years, where the warmest water is where all of the cloud is. So there'd be a lot more cloud activity here. There'd be floods in Peru and that sort of thing. And here when we've got cooler water to our north, cooler than average, that's when there's pretty much blue skies, less cloud and less moisture feeding into our weather pattern. So that's what a dry pattern looks like. Keep an eye on this area though, and we'll compare and look at, say, what it looks like in October of 2010. So there you go, there's the wet pattern there, and that's a La Nina, big La Nina in October 2010. It was pretty wet, but you can see here all the warm water in that situation. The warmest water is in our part of the world, heaps of moisture blowing in, and then it's up to the 7-day forecast as to whose farm it falls out on. But that's pretty much the difference between those big wet years and big dry years. Okay, if we look at the long-term record for Meredith and we divide it into terciles, that is the driest third of years, the wettest third of years, and the third of years in the middle, we get these sort of three. So what we'll look at is just see, was there anything different in this rainfall record at Meredith when we had one of those Indian Ocean dipole years or an El Nino or La Nina year? So here's El Nino pattern, and when we go through that Meredith rainfall record and we're looking at August to October rainfall, and rather than just a third of those years being decile 1 to 3, it was more like 2 out of 3 were dry years. There was still the odd one that was wet, and this is average, but you can see the El Nino years, when there's less moisture coming out of the Pacific, doubles the chance of a dry spring. When the La Nina's on and there's extra moisture floating about, that increases the chance of actually having an average or wetter year. You can still get a dry year, but it just changes the odds. And I guess that's sort of where these seasonal predictors come in, is that they can you can understand about how the season's set up, but it doesn't guarantee that it actually happens, but it certainly does change the odds. The Indian Ocean dipole, when it's in its drier phase up here, there's less moisture feeding in through northwest cloud bands and increases the chance of drier just a bit. And then in the IOD negative years, when there's extra moisture barreling in, it certainly increases the chance of an average or wetter year and less chance of drier. So that's what happened in 2016, brought that bit of extra moisture down. Pretty helpful. So that's good old-fashioned variability. Is there anything different now compared to the long-term variability? Well, temperature's a bit different. The Bureau tells us, and this is 100 years record for Victoria, summer maximum temperatures, autumn, winter and spring. A lot of variability, but basically we're going through a process where we're squeezing in an extra month of summer, and that's just meaning summer starting a fraction earlier and lasting a bit longer into autumn. But what's probably of interest to a lot of farmers in Victoria is that springs of the last sort of 10-15 years, we've had a lot of warmer springs where it can be between 1 and 2 or even 3 degrees warmer, and so that certainly gives us some bumpy springs, especially if we haven't got a lot of extra moisture. And also what's a bit different, this is the pressure pattern over southern Australia, and when they look at the pressure since 1950, you can see it goes up and down quite a bit, and usually these sort of higher pressure years are when there's an El Nino on, but what's been noticed is that there's a bit of a trend there, and that's sort of what they've observed. And it's also what they expect with global warming, that as things get warmer, this pressure pattern gets a bit stronger and just squeezes the odd cold front further south, which is why we miss the occasional rain event some years. Also, just looking at this, just small changes in runoff can lead to bigger changes, small changes in rainfall can lead to bigger changes in runoff, and this is from Lerderderg River. I tried to get one in the Moorabool, but most of the catchment's been altered in some way, so this is a reference station which is from within a national park, and you can just see since 1960 this is the normal flow there from Sardine Creek at O'Brien's Crossing and the Lerderderg, but sort of since the late 90s that runoff just hasn't got back to where it is, so the landscape's a bit dry. So we've seen that a lot on farms. We'll still get some good years of runoff, but as a broader pattern it's not as reliable as it once was, which means we've got to plan for a bit better for our farm water security. This is a recent paper by David Stevens, who looked at the seasonality of rainfall for the last 100 years and then compared that with the seasonality of rain in the last 15 years, and basically showed that the sort of winter dominant rainfall patterns, which we've still got winter dominant at Meredith, but just showing that some of that summer pattern rainfall, those zones all shifting south, and so that's probably something to expect more in the future, where we might have a bit more of a mixed rainfall throughout the year. So part of the challenge of modern day farming is there's farming happening all over Australia in various climate zones, but the issue is just how your farm set up to deal with that variability from one year to the next. So these are all the things that farmers are doing to deal with that variability. We've got lots of modern technologies and R&D, genetics and innovations, which really underpin some of our modern production. It's amazing what farmers can produce. But also dealing with increasing variability, we're needing improved farm and regional infrastructure, especially for storage of water and fodder. This is going to be really important in terms of how we set ourselves up to deal with greater variability and the occasional dry year. We've got lots of good things like the growth in local and export markets, really important that we undertake good biosecurity to make sure we maintain those markets. Business management for variable years in income is really critical, because what I guess a lot of farmers are noticing, that while there's not just seasonal variability, there's also variability in income that you receive for things, and so when everything goes right, you can probably make more money than ever in farming, but if you get a couple of bad years and the price is low as well, you can lose a lot of money as well. So it really is increasing the importance on that business management to handle this variability from one year to the next. So farm planning is really important. All of the things to protect soils, especially when we're going through drier years, how we don't overgraze and lose soils, because how our farms respond is all about doing as little damage as possible when we're having those tough seasons. So maintaining pasture cover and a lot of good stuff that's happening with farm planning and land care. And of course, really important, you've got good networks, knowledge, surround yourself with good people because agriculture's got a bright future. But it's also quite a brutal industry, so make sure you surround yourself with good knowledge and information and networks so that you've got what you need to grow your business. So all the best with your course. And if you're interested in any more on seasonal forecasts, we email out the Break newsletter, which has a summary of seasonal forecasts and what the Indian Ocean Dipole and El Nino is up to each year. So just drop an email to the Break at ecodev.vic.gov.au. And if you get a chance, check out the Climate Dogs, which give a quick summary of some of those big climate drivers that drive our wet or dry years. Anyway, good luck.